God's perfect timing. Have you ever thought your life was falling apart? You ever rest or relied on things and just found them just not reliable? That things are starting to fall to pieces, but then maybe days or years later, you look back on that time of your life and you think, wow, putting it in perspective, that was really kind of a crucial time in my life. Some big decisions were made. There was a real impact that was happening there, and it was a watershed moment. So you can look back in your life and look at those things. You can also look forward to say that there are certain times in your life where things will be different, that there's almost a season of your life, whether it's going through early education. Oh, when I finally get out, when I finally move out, these things will be different. Or when I'm done with school, then things will be different. When I get settled down, when I get my house, when I get, move out, all these kind of things, when they happen to children, when the children are there and then the children are gone, these different seasons in your life, you can either look back if you've had them or look forward to them if they're still to come. And that is more like what the idea of time is in the Bible. It's not so much when a clock says something, it's more of when the time is right for something. If I were to ask a farmer, and he's out planting his field, let's say it's early spring, and he's planting corn, and I were to stop and ask him, when are you gonna harvest this? When are you gonna take this corn off? And he would look at me, kind of shrug, and say, well, when it's ready. And you could probably say at a certain time during the fall that that, hey, we're going to be taking the corn off, but you don't know for sure because it's based on the nature of the product itself to say when it's ready. There's so many other factors that are going in there. You can't just look at a clock or a calendar to say, well, it's time. It depends. I was helping my daughter bake a cake, and I asked her, when you take it out of the oven? And she looked at the box and said 30 minutes. And I said, well, it depends. You have to check the cake to see if it's, all these kind of things. She says, but the box says 30 minutes. It doesn't matter. That part doesn't matter. It's going to give you an idea, but it really still does depend on the product itself, what you're working with. So it was with the timing in the Old Testament that we have certain seasons, certain times when things are going to happen. You can't necessarily look at the clock and to say, this is this time, this is when this thing is going to happen. So it was with the birth of Christ. God's timing was perfect on these things. He unveiled the timing of Christ's birth was crucial. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. God set up history in a certain way. So just as we were looking at the timing of certain things happening, you have the timing of the birth of Christ. When did it happen? Was it special? Were there certain things that build up to that made it crucial? Just like when a cake was ready in an oven to come out, or when a field was ripe, was the timing of the field ripe for this? And we're going to look at several ways to say it had to happen during this time, that there were several things that come together and make this event, this timing, perfect. The first is the religious landscape. How were things set up in Israel for the receiving of the Messiah? Then the cultural landscape. There were things beyond just Israel itself. There were things that were in a larger cultural landscape that made this prime opportunity for Jesus' arrival. And then the political landscape too. It was just like cultural. The larger picture was, this timing is right, that the field is ready, the corn is ready to come off, the cake is ready to come out of the oven. All these things were just coming. So we're going to look at first religious landscape. how was this set up? There's so many ways, but we're going to just take a look at a couple here. Jesus, as the Messiah, satisfied temple requirements. There were things that were going on in the religious practices that he was the fulfillment of. And we're going to take a couple look at a few things in that, and as well as messianic prophecies. Those had to be fulfilled. Was there any time requirements for either the temple sacrifices or the fulfillment of the messianic prophecies? And the answer is, yeah, there was, historically speaking, when looking at the calendar of events that were happening, this was a critical time. And it was at this point where the field was ripe. Jesus satisfied and completed temple sacrifices. You had the Passover lamb in Exodus 12. You had burnt offerings, peace offerings, sin offerings, scapegoats, red heifer, and many more. Now we're just looking at the sacrifices that were done and how Jesus fulfilled the sacrificial system. He completed all that was happening. In fact, all these sacrifices were pointing toward these. You got Leviticus 1, 3, 4 through 5, 16, Numbers 19, all these passages and many more that we're talking about the Messiah. But these specifically had to have, Jesus had to fulfill them, and they had to do it in a certain time because he had to do this with the temple still around. Jesus said, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets, but I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." He's going to satisfy the requirements. Those requirements that were written there, he's not going to say, listen, I'm not going to say that those weren't worth anything. They were worth something, and I'm going to show you how they were, and I'm going to satisfy them. Those laws and those requirements. He also, in Hebrews 10, verse 10, it says, and by that will, we have been made holy through the sacrifice of the blood of Jesus Christ once and for all. It was a one-time completed fulfillment of all the sacrificial system. But when this priest, talking about Jesus being the high priest, when this priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. So he completed this. It's completed. It's fulfilled. And then again in Romans 6:10, it says, the death he died once for all, but the life he lives to God. So it's a completed system. The key here, though, is Levitical sacrifices could not have been done after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD. So, in other words, the Jewish sacrifices were being done after they had come back out of captivity and the temple had been restored, all the way up until 70 AD. So the sacrificial system was going. That sacrificial system was pointing towards Jesus as being the fulfillment of it. He comes, he does it, then it ends. But it can't continue without the temple. In Jewish circles now, you do not have sacrificial. The sacrificial system doesn't exist anymore. You go to synagogue, they are not slaughtering sheep. It does not happen. So it had Jesus' fulfillment of that had to happen before 70 AD. What about messianic prophecies? Were there any that were time related? The Old Testament has somewhere between 200 and 400 prophecies that were fulfilled by Jesus. Depends on how you really count or look at specific passages to say whether they're messianic or not. So between 200 and 400. When I say messianic, those are prophecies in the Old Testament that are talking about the Messiah coming. The sheer unlikeliness that one person could fulfill all these prophecies points to the fact that Jesus is indeed the Messiah. Now, were any of those related to that were time dependent? Well, there were a couple. And look at Daniel chapter 9. Daniel's vision includes a prophecy about the arrival of the anointed one, the Messiah, and the destruction of the city and the sanctuary. So the Messiah comes, and then you have the destruction of the city and the sanctuary, which is the temple. Again, 70 AD. There's another verse way back in Genesis where Jacob is blessing Judah. Now, Judah is his oldest child, and he's giving blessings for each one. He prophesies over Jacob, and he says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah. I said Jacob, I meant Judah. So he's talking to Judah, his oldest, and he says, the scepter shall not depart from him. And what that means, a scepter would be a rulership, that he will continue to rule. In the line of David came, he was of the tribe of Judah. So David, being the king in the Old Testament, that prophecies would be made that his kingdom, his line would never fail. But then you look at the destruction of Israel with Babylon coming in. They're no longer around. When they're restored, they really don't have a king. And then Jesus, they're waiting for the return of that. They believe that the root of Jesse, this prophecy about the line of David will come back, and you will have a king out of that line of David, out of Judah. That kingdom will never end. And so that is talking about Jesus. Well, how does that have anything to do with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD or some other time-related thing? When you have the destruction of the temple, you have the destruction of Jerusalem. And this came because the Romans said, they've had enough. They had enough with the Jews. There was a rebellion. They said, it's all over. They destroyed the temple. They razed the city, pretty much. They burned the city. And then they erected another temple, I believe it was Zeus, over where the previous temple of Jerusalem was, the Jewish temple. So all these things come together to say this destruction happens. But what does that have to do with the line of Judah? What does that have to do with David's his kingly line continuing? Well, when they came through, you also had the destruction. When the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, you also had the destruction of the Jewish records. So they were no longer able to necessarily say which line they came from. There was a bit of a tradition that people knew what line they came from. Paul said that he knew that he came from the line of the tribe of Benjamin. But other than that, you really didn't know. And so once there was the destruction of those records, you couldn't really say who was of what tribe. And if you do have a king, you can't really say that he's of the line of Judah. So that line of Judah stopped with Jesus, and because he was resurrected, that line continues only through him. So neither of these, neither the sacrificial system nor the line of Judah would have been able to have continued after the destruction of the temple. So we've taken a look at those two things, and that they had to be done before 70 AD. And here you have the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. Not a nice time to go through. So God set up history. We looked at the religious landscape. How about the cultural landscape? How are things set up for then? Jesus told his disciples, do not say there are 4 months yet and then comes the harvest. Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest. Already one who reaps is receiving wages and gathering fruit for eternal life, so that the sower may reap and rejoice together. He wasn't just talking about, oh, look, they're cutting down the fields. It's harvest time. He was saying, because he mentions here about eternal life, he was saying that the time is ripe overall. There's a season now that has come. A season of time where all this work that has been done in the past and sowing the fields is now coming to the harvest. He's talking about that in a spiritual way, about his appearance. So what was the cultural setup for this? We got 3 things going on I want to take a look at. Syncretism and cultural exchange, spread of monotheistic ideas, and a common language, Koine Greek, which we covered in the past. Syncretism and cultural exchange. The cultural melting pot of the Roman Empire facilitated exchange of ideas and religious beliefs. The timing of Jesus' birth provided an opportunity for the Christian message to impact various cultural perspectives. So the timing of Jesus' birth is not just when he would be born and, okay, we're going to have Christmas now. It's not just that. It's his life, his death, his resurrection, and the birth of the church and what happens after that. And so all of that needs to be set up before his birth so that when there is the birth of the church, it spreads. The news of his kingdom spreads as far and fast as it can because it's primed, just like a wildfire. There's kindling out there. It's dry. There's wind. All these conditions are right just for the almost instantaneous spread of Christianity. So I'm going to zoom up on this map a little bit and show you this is different parts of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was not this monolithic, everybody loves Rome type of thing. There were a bunch of different cultures. When Rome advanced, when the empire spread across the Mediterranean, it took over many cultures that would normally fought each other or would have had nothing to do with Rome, that they're now subjugated under Rome. You have these cultures still there. And so it's sort of like a melting pot that people are forced together. They have to live together. They have to learn how to work together. And so there you have this cultural exchange that's happening. And it's not just in Judea. It's not just where Jesus was. It was throughout the empire. So you have this idea that, hey, we're no longer just insulated in our own culture. We're having contact with these other people. So that was a big thing that had happened. Another thing was spread of monotheism. The Hellenistic and Roman periods witnessed an increasing openness to monotheistic ideas. The old gods and pantheons weren't cutting it anymore, so they were looking for, well, these old gods, I'm supposed to be getting stuff from them. I'm supposed to be able to sacrifice to them. They're supposed to be able to do what I'm asking, but it's just not working out. What other things are out there that I could look at? And so you had these other ideas. A lot of mystery religions in the first century were popping up. Mithraism, Isis and Osiris cults were coming back in vogue, getting some of the old Egyptian stuff. That was like, very trendy at the time. Dionysian mysteries, the Attis cult and Orphic mysteries and others that were all going on. So you had all these different philosophies, ideas, little micro religions that are happening and stuff. But a lot of them had to do with monotheistic concepts, which was, I wouldn't say it's necessarily new, but it was very trendy at the time, first century. So you had those two things going, a cultural exchange, spread as monotheism. How about this guy? Alexander the Great. In the 4th century BC, Alexander the Great conquered new lands and brought Greek culture with him. We talked about this previously in another live stream, but it does again play an important role here. And as he conquered these new lands, he brought the ideas of Greek philosophy and politics and language with him. It's called Hellenization. With that thinking, he brought the language, and the language then became the common language of the region and the area. And here's our famous map where Alexander the Great goes nuts and just wipes it all out, and then he doesn't last. He doesn't live long, and his generals take over. But that ended up with the blue side of this map showing that was all Greek speaking, which makes it easier for the exchange of thoughts. Syncretism, the spread of monotheistic ideas, and a common language brought this all together. So just like a tinderbox, really, I used to live in Southern California, and the time of year where things got dry, and if you had a wet spring, you had a lot of fresh growth that was happening. Well, when it dries out in the summer and the later summer and you get into fall, that becomes very, very dry. And the Santa Ana winds blow in with the heat and the spark, boom, you get all these wildfires happening. And that's kind of what this is. The spark was Pentecost with the flames of the tongues of fire, and then just going from there. So the last thing that God set up, and you can look at many more than this, but we're just looking at these three. We had the religious, the cultural, and now you have the political landscape, and that was Rome. What role did Rome play? Well, you had cultural receptivity, Pax Romana, and Roman roads. Cultural receptivity is a lot like we were just talking about, with you have all these different cultures that are together there. The cultural climate of the time, with openness to spiritual and philosophical ideas, provided a fertile ground for the reception of Jesus' teachings. A lot of people didn't like this. Some of the religious leaders at the time said, we don't want to have any different ideas than what we already have. But Jesus said, it's not different. This is a fulfillment and an extension of those ideas. This time has come. So you had the cultural receptivity. You also had Pax Romana, the Roman peace. And if you studied Rome at all, you know this. All the guys are always thinking, I'm thinking about Rome once a day. So, it's there. The Roman Empire's dominance during this period facilitated the ease of travel and communication across the territory. This provided an advantageous environment for the spread of Jesus' teaching and the subsequent growth of Christianity. Not that Rome was favorable towards Christians at all. They weren't. In fact, some of the persecution helped fan the flames and spread Christianity as well. But the very fact that you had this system and you had general peace through all these nations around the Mediterranean, that allowed the spread of ideas quickly across the entire empire. With it came their roads. And I'm not telling you anything new. The extensive network of well-maintained roads, Roman roads, allowed for efficient travel, facilitating the spread of the gospel and missionary journeys of early Christian leaders. Some of these roads, I was going to throw up another image showing satellite views. You can still see the remnants of these lines where these roads hit the commerce lines that are still in some places in use for today. So these roads, why don't we make roads like this anymore? It seems like these things, they lasted, and we're still, I don't know about where you're living, but we're constantly doing road work. You can tell when springtime is up because all the orange barrels pop up. Roman roads would be nice. And I don't know if they could handle a semi going over them, but they've lasted a good long time, and they allowed the spread of Christianity early on. So you have these three things from the political landscape that facilitate the early spread of the gospel, which would have happened right after Jesus's life. So Jesus' life right then was critical. Could there be other times in history where this would have spread like this? Not in ancient times. Nothing like this. Maybe in modern times where we have even better communication and better means of travel that would, it wouldn't take you several weeks to cross the Roman Empire. It takes you just hours to get across Europe right now. So we do have better communication, better forms of travel now. But the other things that would have led up to that, where you had the religious practices and the other things that were happening, and I don't believe that God really wanted to wait until this modern era to provide the sacrifice for our sins. It would have been better done earlier. So all these things come together to say that that's a crucial point where God had set up all these things so that he could be a part of history. When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. And we looked at this spread before. The spread of Christianity happened so fast because these other things were just primed. And you have, fast forward, this next week, we're looking at putting, this current week, we're looking at putting Christ back into Christmas. So much of our culture is deviated from that. We're going to look at different movies that are coming up. This This we have a list of movies that you guys have selected to say that your families are going to be watching it this week, or that you have, or your friends, or these are movies that come up often. We're going to look at these again and say, what themes can be pulled out of this to say, to use this as conversation points and springboards to say, wow, that was really cool. Look at this part of the movie, and to use that to share the gospel with. We've got tomorrow, we have It's a Wonderful Life, A Life Without You, one of the classics. And then we start the rest of the week. We have a poll going on right now for the last slot. We have one last slot on Thursday that we haven't really decided which movie is going to be going in there. If you haven't had a chance to put your 2 cents in, now's the time to do it. Vote for your favorite movie, and we'll pick the top one out of that poll. We already have one that's really pulled ahead of all the others. So get your vote in there while you can. And we're also going to be talking about on Wednesday, I believe it's Wednesday, old versus new of The Grinch. We're going to be comparing him, and then we'll see the others. And I'm going to switch over to see if we have any comments here. Do Bad Santa. I don't want to do Bad Santa. You can vote for Bad Santa if you want, but you might. I think you're only going to have one vote. But go ahead, put him in there. See what we get. You might get 1,000 votes. Who knows? If you get 1,000 votes, then Bad Santa is there. And yeah, that's currently out in the theaters, right? Yeah, I've heard some not so good things about that one. Yep. Damyan Kuzmich, good greetings to you as well, Kuzmich. All right. Well, if you've enjoyed this time together, please like and subscribe, and share if you can, and we will see you coming up tomorrow.